Okay, we're going to keep talking about how group counseling, I think, can benefit RPGs. This will be called planning. The importance of planning a group carefully cannot be overemphasized. Two stages of planning are necessary: the planning that goes on before forming a group and the planning of each group session. Things to think about before you start a group: who should the members be? How will the members be screened? And when will the group meet? Another thing to think about might be, are you going to advertise for this? Are you going to try to find people online? Are you going to try to find people that you know or people that maybe your friends know? These are all things to consider. Who should the members be? There are no absolute guidelines for deciding whom to include. Usually the purpose of the group, kind of group, time constraints, and setting will help the leader to decide whether and how to limit membership. Another consideration is whether or not to place members who are very different in age and or background in the same group. Sometimes mixing the ages or backgrounds is very beneficial, and at other times it may be detrimental. It really depends on what your group likes. Maybe you want to just be, a hardcore group of old school grog nerds, and that's fine, as long as that's what you guys want. Sometimes you want to just have young kids, and old people playing is not, that's like, oh, I don't want any old people playing in my group. But from my experience, I think RPGs can really take in all walks of life as long as everyone is respectful of one another. How will the members be screened? And this would be something that you would do before you started your group, just to see, who you think you should be in the group. The obvious first question is whether to screen or not. The reason for screening is that not everyone is appropriate for every group. Also, there will often be certain kinds of members the GM is seeking. Screening allows her to pick appropriate players, But with certain kinds of groups, screening is either unnecessary or only slightly beneficial. Here's things like the personal interview. I would suggest some of these things if you're allowing complete strangers into your group. Maybe you go to a coffee shop or something and try to do something like this. It allows the leader to most easily access the appropriateness of the member for the group. A second valuable reason is that it gives the leader a chance to make individual contact with members. And third is that the GM has a chance to inform the player about the group, the rules, the content, membership, meeting times, expectations, and so forth. For the assessment of appropriateness, by asking questions relevant to the type of group being formed, the leader can better determine if the potential member is appropriate for the group. In the personal interview, the leader can often spot these persons whose needs and goals differ from those of the group. If you're running a game that has lots of miniatures combat, lots of tactical decisions, and you talk to the guy and he says that he hates that sort of thing, he's probably not going to fit in well with that group. So maybe, you should mention that to him. It's like, we do a lot of miniatures. Most of the things we do are on a battle grid, or, whatever problem area you can ascertain from talking to them. Let's see here. And here, if a potential player is seriously disturbed, the leader may want to exclude that person from the group. So obviously, if you meet some guy in a coffee shop and he's, just whacked out crazy, obviously you're not going to invite him over to your house. Individual contact with the member. Personal interviews permit the leader and the member to meet each other before the group actually begins. It is important for the leader to make this experience more than just a question and answer session. The leader should realize that the interview is the beginning of his relationship with the player. The interview should be as comfortable as possible while the leader assesses the needs and goals of the potential player. Informing the player about the group. During the screening interview, the leader can explain the purpose of the group, how it will be conducted, some of the rules, and any other relevant information. I would suggest talking about the other players as well, maybe some of their quirks. I know some of my players, there's some possible friction between a couple of them that I have to keep an eye on. Things like, you're not going to like Bill because he does this sort of thing, and I have a feeling that I'll drive you crazy. So we'll just try to work around that. Maybe even talk to the other player about that later. Like, this new guy Brian, whenever you do this sort of behavior, it's really going to drive him nuts. So please, stop rolling your dice incessantly at the table, things like that. Other forms of screening, you can ask, why do you want to be in this group, what their expectations are, what kind of games they like to play, how do you think you can contribute to the group, And again, this is pretty formal. You probably don't have to be this formal. But again, this is what I'm getting from the group counseling book. The key to effective screening is to remember that you are attempting to find out certain information in order to form a group of members who can work together, share, and learn from each other. And I would add, to have fun together. The GM can also sort members according to their interaction style. She may even place some highly verbal members in a group with some non-talkers. At times, it is useful to mix certain characteristics in that way. In other words, there are really no absolute guidelines for making these decisions. Just go by your gut instincts, and if that turns out to be not the best thing to do, change how you do it. When will the group meet? There are two considerations here: the time of day and the frequency of meetings. Ideally, the meeting time will not conflict with any other activities of the members. I've had problems with Saturday groups, for instance, because there's always family reunions or events that also take place during Saturdays. So that's just an example. The member schedules also need to be considered when setting a time. If the members work, perhaps the evening is the best, or maybe even early morning or noon, if they work like third shift. Beginning leaders will often make the mistake of planning a group without fully considering the many factors that may make the meeting time of the group inconvenient. The leader's schedule, naturally, is also important. She must always be available to lead the group, and in most work situations, some days are better than others. So don't give in to the players. Like they can only meet like these 2 days, and they would rather meet on Tuesday, but Tuesday is bad for you. Monday would be much more preferable. You really, since you're running the game, you really should try to make it as comfortable as possible so that you don't get burned out. In the case of groups, it is inadvisable to lead one group right after another. It is too taxing on the GM. This would be an instance of, maybe you're at a gaming club and, they have 3 time slots. Running games all day long can be very tiring and exhausting, and use your GM resources. Besides deciding the best time to meet, the leader will usually be the one to decide how often the group will meet. Some groups meet twice a week, once every 2 weeks, monthly. The number of meetings per week or month depends on the kind of group, its purpose, and the availability of members and the GM. There is no set formula for how often a group should meet, and really just play it by ear. It is important that the group meet neither so often nor so infrequently as to defeat the overall purpose. Sometimes, if you're meeting every 3 months, I guess it's better than nothing, but at the same time, you're probably going to lose people because they're just going to find something else to do. If you're meeting once a week, that might be too taxing for some people, and maybe their wives are going to get angry and not want them to go. Things like that. Additional considerations for pre-group planning. The leader will want to ascertain whether any additional materials are needed for the group. Planning the individual sessions. Minimal planning is necessary when the members can come to understand the purpose of the group and arrive at the sessions eager and ready to role play and share ideas and opinions. The reason is that the thoughtful leader can organize the session in a way that makes the group both interesting and productive. Planning a first session is very different from planning a middle or closing session. During the first session, there are a number of things the leader will want to do, such as having members introduce themselves, clarifying the purpose of the group, what kind of games they like to play, house rules, setting a positive tone for the group, helping members to get over any uneasiness and awkwardness, and going over any guidelines or ground rules for the group. Things like if the dice rolls cockeyed, what do you do then? Not doing the same thing week after week tends to keep members interested and curious. The leader should always consider whether the format is getting stale. Don't be afraid to change things up. The leader also needs to anticipate potential problems when planning. Additionally, it is a good idea to have a backup plan in case something doesn't go as well as you thought or a vital member doesn't come. These are things like, one of the players is a chosen one, and the chosen one decides that he's going to show up every third session. That's another reason not to do it, like, you're the chosen one kind of storyline. Let's see here. This will be for the beginning phase. No matter what the leader has planned for the session, he must evaluate the interest of the members, their comfort level, and their commitment level in the first minutes. If he gathers that interest or trust levels are low, the leader can avoid mistakes. He can spend more time trying to warm up the group and even suggest things to talk about. Namely, just getting to know each other, I guess, before you start to actual role play. When planning the session's beginning, the leader should always think about whether time is needed to warm up the members. Some groups require almost no time. The members come ready to role play, talk, and discuss things. In others, the leader must plan to spend some time at the beginning of every group to get focused on what's going on, what they're doing, and there's a number of ways the leader can do this. He can talk about the last session, and then talk about the plan for the current session, if there are any. Ask the players to comment on the past week and what happened. Get players to talk about current events, weather, movies, television shows, etc., as long as you keep this kind of a minimum, but it's a good way to get people, warmed up. Ask members if there are any questions they would like answered from last session, and then spend, maybe like 5 minutes answering them. So again, depending on what your group's like, I know my group that I have been going to on Mondays generally takes a half an hour of, as we would say, just BSing and just talking about things, and then that seems to be like the time it takes for everyone to get comfortable, get their food ready, their drinks, and then we start playing. All right. The leader should always allow 5 to 10 minutes for summarizing and processing the session at the end of it. Again, it's kind of like warming up, but it's just kind of like a calm down period. Sometimes you can plan sessions and try to gauge how much time each one is going to run. I'm not a big planner as far as RPGs are concerned, but I'll talk a little bit about what it says. An estimated time is given for each activity to help gauge how the flow of the group might go. This general guideline helps greatly during the session, because otherwise the leader has little idea whether too much time is being spent on a topic or not enough. It is important to allot specific amounts of time for activities, maybe certain events in the game that you're running. But we also want to caution you about becoming a slave to your plan. Realize that the plan can be, and often will need, to be changed as the session progresses. The plan's purpose is merely to help you organize a session in a logical sequence. Depending on how you like to run games, this could be considered like the railroad tracks. I tend to like to allow my players a lot more freedom, but a plan does have its benefits. Talk a little bit about the frequent mistakes you can make while planning, namely irrelevant or meaningless content. Too often leaders do not choose activities, topics, things in the campaign setting that are of interest to the players. Leaders will also introduce things to which only 1 or 2 members can relate to, which causes the others to lose interest and to become resentful. It is absolutely essential that the leader do everything that he can to ensure that the session planned will be relevant and valuable and interesting to the players. I'll give an example. One of my players loves combat. If I don't have one combat during a session, he would probably not get anything from the group at all. So I always try to incorporate a little combat into every session. Sometimes it's kind of obvious that I'm doing this, but most of the time I try to integrate it, as seamless as possible. And the same thing, there's some players that hate combat, well, not hate combat, but they put up with it for the most part, and they really like the social interaction with NPCs. So I obviously, incorporate more of that into the game too. Poor planning of time and order. A mistake that many beginning GMs make is not planning their available time well. I find that keeping a watch or a cell phone with the clock or a clock on the wall helps you kind of gauge the pacing and keep track of that sort of stuff. A good plan has a reasonable order to it, but again, don't be a slave to it. Another problem is lack of flexibility. Some leaders rigidly follow their plan. This would be the railroad tracks that we talk about all the time. Others fail to recognize when their plan is not working. It is challenging yet necessary to be flexible enough to deviate from a plan whenever it becomes clear that members are not benefiting or are not being entertained by your ideas. So, in conclusion, for this section anyway, we discuss how to plan for a session and a series of sessions. We discuss who group members should be, how they are screened, and when, and for how long the group should meet. We stress that a leader or GM must plan the beginning, middle, and ending phases of any particular session. Members do not mind a group that is planned if it is planned well, and you are flexible. Do remember that even though we emphasize the importance of having a plan, the effective leader is never a slave to that plan. If players become very involved with a topic or they find an NPC interesting, the GM should probably adjust his plan accordingly. If a valuable new topic or a new choice comes up during the session, he might want to alter this plan. Conversely, if the plan is not working, he will want to abandon it and do something else that's more entertaining. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.